part of the goal of this program is to develop emotional literacy. That emotional literacy is often what happens in a split second in terms of the decisions we make. And that one of the goals of this program is to help develop emotional literacy so that when we get to those crossroads in our lives, where the decisions that we can make very quickly can influence our lives literally for generations, that we have the best chance of making decisions that can help our dreams come true. And so much of it that happens in that crossroads that you see. The crossroads where with whoever we share our life with, that when we face challenges, that the decisions we make, our ability to communicate and to understand both emotions in ourselves and the other person have a very significant impact on what happens at those crossroads. And in that crossroads that we refer to generally as the relationship roadmap, there are just two directions. There's the pain direction, where we are more likely to experience anger, sadness, fear, disappointment. And there's the pleasure direction, where we're more likely to experience happiness, joy, caring, desire, feelings of love. It's not so much the events of our lives that determine whether we experience life on the pain or pleasure side of that roadmap, nearly as much as it is how we deal with the events of our lives. We've seen that with trauma. The issue isn't necessarily trauma, but it's how we deal with the symptoms of trauma, with changes in finance and career, with health challenges. The way we deal with the issues is often much more important than the issue itself. So I want to look at this in more detail, but everything in our work, in this program and in every other program we teach, is designed to help people, if they're on the pleasure side of that roadmap, what gives us the best chance of staying there? So that we don't have to use the trial and error approach. Because the trial and error approach, that might make sense, from learning new ways to fix something, or make something. But when it comes to the foundation of our lives, when it comes to the foundation of our children's lives, the trial and error approach can come at a very high price. So what are the things that we need to know? That if we're on the pleasure, happiness side, we have a good chance of staying there. And if we're on the pain side, what are the skills that give us the best chance of being able to move over to the other side? So let's look at this in some more detail. We call it the relationship roadmap. And this is a concept that was developed by psychiatrist Daniel Casriel. And Dr. Casriel in the 60s and 70s was working in the field of treating addictions, primarily treating addictions. He had created some residential centers in New York. One was known as AREBA, the Accelerated Rehabilitation of Emotions, Behaviors, and Attitudes. And he was having successes in his work that were very unique, but I believe his work is still ahead of its time. And what he recognized was sort of underneath all the symptoms that were showing up through various destructive behaviors was that people weren't getting needs met that they didn't even know they had. That generally, anywhere you go in the world, if you ask people what you need, what are the things we need, people know we need air, food, water, shelter. That if we don't have the air we need to breathe, there's going to be signs of deprivation, the same with water, same with food, same with shelter. And people's values will go out the window real quick if you can't breathe. If somebody's struggling to get their last breath, they're not really thinking about the future. They're thinking about, I'll do whatever it takes. If someone you love is struggling to get their last breath, they'll do whatever it takes. Same with someone's hungry. People are generally not very present to their values or beliefs or issues of integrity when those biologically based needs are threatened. What he recognized is that bonding is also a biological need. That just like air, food, water, and shelter, when those needs are not met, there are signs of deprivation that can go all the way to the point of affecting life itself. The same is true with bonding. That what was underneath most of what he was seeing and treating as antisocial behaviors, addictions, was a result of people not getting their biological needs for bonding met. And then no matter how much work he did to help them with the symptoms of that, if he didn't help them create a life in which they could get their needs met, they were going to still experience pain and look for ways to not be happy. So that became the central concept of our work. And the recognition that there's something unique about bonding. And first of all, when I say bonding, well, he said bonding. What we mean is the combination of emotional and physical connection with another human being. The emotional part of bonding is the ability to just be yourself. You don't have to wear a mask. You don't have to hide. You don't have to pretend. You don't have to act like you always get it right, or you know all the answers. You can just be yourself. And that it's safe for the people who are looking to you as someone they're bonding with. They can be themselves too, including the way of good days and bad days and plenty of days in between. That's the emotional openness part of bonding. There are a lot of relationships we have in the world where we can't be emotionally open. It doesn't, at work we often can't be that way. In relationships where it's not safe to be vulnerable, we couldn't be that way. But in terms of intimacy, in terms of sort of that foundation of our lives, it has to be safe to be emotionally open, and for others to be emotionally open with us. That's the first half of bonding. The second half of bonding is affection. And as I often say, you can add sex to affection like you could add dessert to dinner. But the human need is for affection. And that's why, children today, infants, when they're born, are immediately held instead of whisked away to a sterile nursery, because they recognize that if they were held, they had a much better chance of fighting off early challenges to survival. And that's why with seniors, too, there's much more integration of opportunities for human connection. One of the awards that Pears won for our work with the San Diego VA was from Plaintree, which does certification of hospitals, for the impact of this work in strengthening connections with social support networks. Because we need those social connections. We need those social connections are vital to our healing, our health, and our well-being. So, but what's unique about bonding versus the other needs? What's unique? What stands out that's unique about that? That's a good one.
You can't do it alone.
Can't do it alone. That's the major takeaway. That's the big point of bonding. There are a lot of other points that are also important. But you can't do it alone. You can eat, drink, breathe, build a hut for yourself, or dig a hole. You can't bond for yourself. And you can have someone you can talk to. You can buy someone to talk to. You can, hire someone to talk to. There's all kinds of ways to get someone to talk to. That's wonderful, but that's not what we mean by bonding. You can have physical closeness to someone you're not emotionally connected to. And we say that's like hugging a tree. You might go get your arms around it, but it's not going to be all that satisfying. The bonding is that unique combination of emotional and physical connection with another human being. And that is the only biologically based need that we can't meet by ourselves. All the other ones we can. So when we get that, it shifts the meaning of the work of the relationship. Because if the need for bonding is something we can't meet by ourselves, if it takes another person, then what do we need to know to be somebody that the other people who are counting on us to get their bonding needs met, what do we need to know? Who do we need to be someone they can count on? Because just like we wouldn't want to deprive somebody we care about of air, food, water, or shelter, we don't want to deprive them of their needs for bonding. And what do we need to do to make sure that we're creating a life in which we get our needs for bonding met? In terms of relationships becoming vulnerable, when people aren't meeting each other's needs for bonding, relationships become incredibly vulnerable. And despite values and religious beliefs and all kinds of other things, the same as they would become vulnerable if someone wasn't getting the air, food, water, or shelter that they needed. And when people don't get their needs met, they tend to experience life on the pain side of this roadmap, which starts with a sense of dis-ease. And that sense of dis-ease, we know today, becomes disease. What starts out as just a general state of discomfort inside the body becomes actual disease in the body. Our immune system doesn't work the same. We don't have the same ability to fight off challenges to our lives, that energy transforms and stays within us. We have a sense of distress and distrust, unhappiness, the anticipation of pain, which can show up as danger, fear, and anger. Those are all things you see when we're on the pain side of that roadmap. When we're on the pleasure side of the roadmap, we tend to have the ability to take on life with a sense of ease. It doesn't mean there aren't challenges. It doesn't mean there aren't problems. There are. But we can take it on. We know we have what it takes to navigate whatever comes our way. We can approach life with eustress, that runner's high, the ability to push through. Who was training for a half marathon? Yes. Plenty of eustress. That ability to push through and to find your way to the other side. That when we're on the pleasure side of your relationship roadmap, there's trust, there's happiness, there's the anticipation of pleasure, which is what gives rise to feelings of love. And that's actually really important information. Because a lot of people will say, I promise to love you forever. That's part of almost every marriage vow. I promise to love you forever. So you could promise, I guess, the spiritual dimension of love. You could promise to make a commitment that you're going to honor forever. But when it comes to the emotion of love itself, how do you promise a feeling? How do you promise what you're going to feel? Because you're not promising what you're going to think. You're promising what you're going to feel. So in order to promise what you're going to feel, it sure is important to know what causes feelings of love to be present. Because if we don't know where those feelings come from, that can very quickly become a very empty promise. So the emotion of love, and I'm not talking about all the other dimensions of love, but the emotion of love comes from the anticipation of pleasure. That's where the emotion of love comes from. That when we anticipate pleasure in our interactions with another person, there's a desire to have more of that, and that's what gives rise to feelings of love. And if instead of anticipating pleasure in our interactions, we anticipate pain, commitment may be there, blood and family may be there, a lot of other things may be there, but the emotion of love is very unlikely to be there. So part of the work of the relationship is about meeting each other's needs for bonding. Another part of the work of a relationship today, and I shared yesterday about how the basis of marriage had shifted from security, stability, and raising children to meeting each other's needs for love and intimacy. And that when that doesn't work, when there's a breakdown in that area for whatever reason, relationships become vulnerable and fragile and often don't last. So sustaining love means staying a pleasure in each other's lives. And that changes. At 16, what's a pleasure may be somebody who walks you home from school. At 19, it might be someone who has a car or a job. At 24, it might be somebody who wants to have a baby. At 30, it might be somebody who is able to travel the world. It changes. In between, it might be someone who's able to get up with the baby at night, or who can buy diapers, or who can massage your head when it hurts. It changes. What's a pleasure at 16 is not going to be what's a pleasure at 66. So one part of what's so vital in relationships is A, staying a pleasure in each other's lives, but we can't do that if we can't communicate. If you can't say to her, when I'm going through X, Y, or Z, this is what I need from you, this is how you're a pleasure to me, she wouldn't know. She could try her very best. She could figure what she would want if it was her, but she wouldn't know if you couldn't tell her. And you couldn't tell her if you didn't feel safe telling her. So that becomes very much a part of the work of the relationship, is how do we stay a pleasure in each other's life? And that takes communication. It takes both sides of communication. Being able to speak and listen clearly, effectively. Because the symptoms that we see, and we see this all over, you can go on any highway, into any checkout line in a grocery store, into any office, church, synagogue, mosque, or any place in between, and you will see symptoms of unhappiness. You will see people that are ill, fatigued, depressed, rigid, constricted, isolated, guarded, and people that choose from whatever is available to not feel what they feel. So whether that's, pot, or whether it's alcohol, or whether it's medications, or whether it's, sex, or whether it's gambling, or whether it's shopping, or whether it's disappearing into their careers, never to come out, people choose from what they know. Because nobody wants to be in pain. When you're on the pleasure side of the roadmap, there's much greater health, energy, flexibility, creativity, the capacity for real intimacy, the ability to be personally responsible, to be able to accept yourself and others as human, not as perfect, not as perfect in that definition of perfect, but perfectly human, perfect works in progress, as my own faith tells me as we're meant to be. So that's the goal of the work. There's not a word that I'm going to say, and the same goes for you all when you're teaching classes. There's not an exercise or concept we share that is not about how do we get or stay on the pleasure side of that roadmap. And for the veteran and military community, I think they understand it better than others, that life is precious. I don't know anyone in the military community who hasn't lost people they loved. Not a one. And what can we do? We can live our lives. We can make the most of our lives. And so much of that is connected to living our lives on the pleasure side of that roadmap.